Hi friends, welcome to PSC Collegiate English. Today let us look at a piece of criticism called an Apology for Poetry, which was written in 1595 by Sir Philip Sidney. This is also known as the Defense of Poesie. It is a seminal piece of criticism in which Sir Philip Sidney he supports poetry and he speaks about how poetry functions to bring out the best in man. Sir Philip Sidney wrote this piece of criticism during the English Renaissance, when extraordinary cultural and social change were taking place in England. He wrote this criticism in response to Stephen Gosson's School of Abuse, which was published in 1579. Stephen Gosson accused poets and playwrights for problems in English poetry. Sir Philip Sidney says poetry is misunderstood by his contemporaries. Poetry is the monarch of arts. He says poetry is a tool for teaching virtue. Poet is a demi-figure who is capable of imagining a more perfect version of nature. This particular criticism is structured into 7 parts, just as rhetorical or oratory is considered. In those days, criticism were not written, they were actually spoken. So in that oratorical form, this has 7 parts. The first one is exordium or introduction. There he speaks about a horse riding anecdote where he met a person called Giovanni Pugano. He says that poetry was the first of arts coming before philosophy or history. Many philosophers or historians wrote in poetry. Example, Plato, Herodotus. They wrote their philosophical allegories in the form of poetry. He also mentions that in Latin, vates, that means seer or a prophet. And in Greek, in order to denote the word poet, they use the word poetis, which meant maker, God. So the Romans considered poets to the level of God. They were nothing less, because poets could create perfect realities using their imagination. Sir Sidney says, using the art of imitation that teaches through delight or pleasure. Sir Philip Sidney is not interested in religious or philosophical poetry, but those written by right poets. This ideal form is not limited in subject matter which exists in nature, but virtue that is well suited to readers. Poet can embody philosophers' wordish description of virtue through stories. Right popular philosopher like Aeneas, such good and right poets could prescribe medicines of cherries. That means even if it is a bitter truth, or even if the disease is so very vulgar and so very infective, they can use medicines of cherries. Through poetry, they can sweetly explain the philosophies of life. Some of the criticism refuted by poet haters are, he says, there are 4 objections or 4 oppositions to poetry. That is, poetry, first one is poetry is a waste of time. Second, poet is a liar. Third, poetry corrupts morals. And fourth, Plato banished poets from the Republic. These are the 4 objections that were raised, and these are the points which Sir Philip Sidney reverses. Sir Philip Sidney says, although these limitations exist, that limitations become the power of poetry. All these objections rest on the power of poetry to move its audience. They are actually reasons to praise. Sir Philip Sidney says that these 4 reasons are not reasons to abuse, but these are the reasons to praise poetry. Because When a poet says, poet just imagines and brings out the real. So Philip Sidney says, a poet never affirmeth, therefore never lieth. Coming to prorogation or conclusion, he says that he also speaks about modern English poetry. He says that the contemporary poetry is of, that is during the 14th century, that is a little poetry of any quality. Poet must be educated to write more elegantly. He says poetry has the power to immortalize people in verse, also to condemn others to be forgotten by ignoring them. Now, if we look at the structure of this rhetoric, we can see first exordium or introduction is given, then proposition, then division or taxonomy is given, then examination of poetry, after that refutation, then peroration, seventh is digression. In this format, this particular piece of criticism is written. Some of the important quotes are, her world is brazen, the poetry only delivers golden. So whatever we see around us in the nature, that is only brazen. But when it is delivered through poetry, it becomes golden, it becomes perfect. Also the next one, very famous, for the poet, he nothing affirmeth and therefore never lieth. The poet never says, never asks his audience to believe, therefore he never lies. Thank you.